Welcome to Cultural Connections Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Forbes. We are here to talk with educational professionals around the world to impact and influence the education system as we focus on cultural connections and the education of multilingual, diverse students. We're excited to have you join us today, and we sincerely hope that you enjoy the show.
Are you ready to take your school district to new heights? Introducing EduSkills, the leading software as a service platform for Title III and multilingual support in education. At EduSkills, we understand the importance of equitable education and empowering multilingual learners to thrive in today's classrooms. Our cutting-edge technology provides school districts across the nation with the tools they need to enhance language acquisition, foster inclusivity, and improve academic outcomes. With seamless implementation and comprehensive support, EduSkills ensures a smooth transition for your district, empowering educators to provide targeted instruction and personalized support. So why wait? Unlock the potential of your school district today with EduSkills. Visit our website at eduskillsllc.com or call us now at 405-879-9898 to schedule a demo. EduSkills, transforming education one student at a time.
And welcome to another podcast of Cultural Connections Lab with myself, your host, Dr. Kelly Forbes. I am so excited to be here today with four special guests from the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond, Oklahoma. And I just have to let all of our listeners know that in all transparency, this is my very first semester with the honor and the privilege of being an adjunct professor. And I could not have been more fortunate than to be with four amazing, fabulous human beings and educators here in Oklahoma, but then also abroad as well. So I wanted to share some time with some fellow colleagues and some master's level students today to discuss things about multicultural education, multilingualism, and assessment, and what that looks like in our classrooms. And so before we start, though, if I can just have you all introduce yourselves, you amazing human beings. Who do we have right here?
Konnichiwa. Hello, my name is Aya Iwamoto, and I'm in the UCO Bilingual Education Master Program. I'm from Japan and Kyoto, and I've been here about 2 years in Oklahoma. So I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you so much. And who do we have next?
Hi, I'm Genevieve Simmons. I am from Edmond, Oklahoma. I am currently a substitute teacher within the Edmond Public School District.
Excellent. And after her.
Hello, my name is Julie Muir, and I'm a English language development teacher at a middle school, Mary Golder Ross. I've been there a couple of years now.
Wonderful. And last but not least.
안녕하세요. My name is Hyekyong Yun, and I've been teaching English to high school students in South Korea for about more than 10 years. And I thought it's about time to revamp my skills as a teacher and have more multicultural and multilinguistic experience. So I'm pursuing a bilingual education degree with this amazing teacher and faculties and friends.
Well, hey, I'm truly so excited to have you all here. And listeners, just so you know, I was letting them know how much fun it would be to have a really good, robust, and academic conversation centered around what we're discussing in our classes right now. And as we've been having these conversations throughout this semester, I know that for myself, I have learned so much from all of you. And I mean that sincerely. And anyone that's out there listening who's listened to any of the episodes before know that I always refer back to my very first class of students, the newcomer students at Taft Middle School and Oklahoma City Public Schools, 6th through 8th grade. There were 7 countries and 8 languages represented, and I always talk about how they were some of the best professors that I've ever had in my life, but I didn't know that at the time. And then I fast forward in my very first time to get to be an adjunct professor. I'm truly just privileged and honored to get to be with all of you And it's truly a humbling experience. And I just want to say thank you, first and foremost, for all the things that you've taught me through this process as well. But thank you for being here to share all of your insight and all of your information, because I know I have been wowed by so many stories from you all. So before we jump into some of the questions, I just want to ask a general question, and anyone can intercept this question if they want. But what are some of the most exciting things that you have experienced in the field of multilingual education, and some of the things that you were not necessarily aware of in multilingual education, whether that be a professional experience or even a personal experience? And that could pertain to anything that we perceive in the pre-K through 12 education system, the university sector, or again, even in our own personal lives when it comes to being multilingual or multicultural. Anything interesting that you all have experienced, really exciting, or something out of the unknown?
I think for me, I brought my fifth grader daughter with me, and I had a lot of opportunities to volunteer in her school. And I was really amazed to find out like how much involvement the parents have in, this school system. Like unlike in Korea, it's kind of like a taboo, almost like a taboo to, for a parent to participate, like because they respect so much of the teacher authority. But here it's very different. Like the teachers are so friendly. Like whenever I volunteer, they like every teacher come up to me and say like I appreciate what you do. Like thank you so much. And I get to like see what like educational experiences my daughter has, and it's been amazing. Like I like take advantage of every opportunity I have because like I'm a student as well, so I want more time than when I was in South Korea. So that's something that I've noticed like really different from my culture. Yep.
I think that's a really interesting component, because here in the United States we have requirements, legal requirements and obligations for not just parental involvement but for parental engagement. And I think a lot of times that whenever we come from maybe a monolingual, monocultural background, and we're trying to make sure that we're following these regulations and we're trying to have our parents involved, that we don't always necessarily have that level of cultural proficiency to understand that maybe from where you come in your home country, that's not what it looks like. And so was there ever a conversation that anyone had with you to explain it, or did you just understand that, oh, I guess they just want me to be really involved, so I'll find ways to be involved? Or what was that conversation like?
First time, like I was like really nervous about like the first volunteer I did was like the popsicle day, and I wasn't sure like what I was supposed to do
For popsicle day?
So like, and I asked my daughter's tutor like what I was supposed to do and stuff, and she like kind of walked me through the procedure. And the school staff at the front desk in the school, like there's this like really nice lady, and she kind of like explained where I should go and what to do. And the parent teacher association staffs, they were really amazing, like really kindly like explain like what I should do, and like really like there was this person that's really good organizer, and she kind of like allocates everybody like what to do, and like everyone should know what to do. So yeah, it went really smooth.
Wonderful. I'm glad that it's been a smooth and good experience. But I think what I'm hearing though is that you appreciate and enjoy being able to be engaged and involved and see what's happening.
Yeah. So I think it's something that I can persuade my colleagues to implement and incorporate some of that stuff, like part of that scheme to my school too.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about all of us being able to learn from each other, but also that cultural component. Because whenever we have all those different points of views and cultural backgrounds, I think that it's like the saying, iron sharpens iron, and we learn more from each other, and we can be better by learning what we do the same, but also differently in our respective countries and even school districts and school sites. That's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I know that you, for example, Julie, are currently a teacher, as you stated in your introduction. So hearing this story right here, how has that translated at all into what your lived experiences are as an educator, serving parents who come from diverse cultural backgrounds?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think It's really interesting to hear that perspective because it is really difficult, I think, for me, like especially my first year teaching and even this year, just making those connections with the parents. I found little ways here and there, but it is very difficult when there's a language barrier. So yeah, I think it's just something that it is very important in building relationships with not only my students but with the parents. But having those close ties with those parents help help just keep, whether it be discipline issues or their grades, it just really helps keep everyone on the same page and up to speed on what they're doing. So yeah, it was a little bit of a culture shock, I think, for me too, because that was kind of a new situation, like having to do that.
Yeah, and I think, and so that culture shock comes on both sides sometimes,
It really
right?
does.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of people, and even including myself, I can watch videos, watch documentaries, hear stories from other people, and that school districts and school systems are different and vary in different countries, for example, right? But it's not really until you're there sometimes and you experience it, or you are an educator who maybe for the first time, because some of our educators out there have never had a student that spoke a language other than English. And so I think that there is that culture shock. So I think making sure that we have that open dialogue and conversation and finding ways to break down those barriers so we don't have language barriers, that we have an interpreter, that we have a translator, anything else that can help facilitate that communication helps ensure that there's a mutual understanding, but at the same time, both people are included and involved, right?
I will definitely say that the parents that I have had are extremely interested in their child's education. They're very much wanting their English to improve. It's very important to them. So with that being said alone, I know that the support is there. It's just making those connections for sure.
Do you have any experiences you'd like to share?
So similar to Hyekyong, where it's different. She is from Korea, but I did actually do 2 years teaching English in Korea myself. And so I have different experiences from her teaching there. One big one I was picking up from just listening to both Julie and Hyekyong was I didn't deal with parents at all when I was teaching. There was only one time when I ever actually had a conversation with a parent of one of my students, and it was when they were taking the student out of the school because they were moving to another country. And this was in my first semester there. So that's at the end of the semester, end of the school year, actually. But the parent came up to me and was thanking me for taking the time to help their daughter with their English. And they were saying we could tell how much her English had improved over, and her confidence had improved. And that was the first time I got any kind of feedback from either the school or the parent, anything. And so for me, that was it was a big eye opener, because I had heard that parents, at least from what I had heard from the other foreign teachers, is that parents are really involved and want to, know how their students are doing in classes. And I had not had any parents at all say anything to me. I hadn't heard anything. And so it was the first time I'd ever had any kind of feedback. And it really stuck with me that I even immediately went down to my desk and wrote down everything the mom had said, because I wanted to keep that memory and use that as encouragement for helping my students that I had.
Now, when in your experiences, I mean, as a teacher, did you ever talk to the parents, or was it maybe a different situation because you were maybe teaching in a different type of a language program, perhaps coming from the United States to South Korea? Can you expand upon that?
I think it's probably because the native English teachers are excluded from the responsibility of us, certain responsibilities that the Korean teachers have. For one, Korean teachers, even in high school and middle schools, there is this system homeroom based. So every teacher should have a parent teacher conference, at least twice a year.
Okay.
So that's where the parents get to meet them, and officially, and the schools hold this introductory lecture, like course, for like an open house night where
Okay.
the parents are invited to the school and get to learn about the curriculum and the school policy. And like after that, usually like I like for me, I usually met with my parents, my students' parents, because I know they are coming like mainly for the purpose of their children, and they really like to meet like their children's homeroom teacher, not the school policy and stuff. So that's like and like whenever like the teacher parent conference is whenever like there's an behavior issue or like the occasion where wherever the occasion occurs. But like officially, it's like twice a year, like in the States. So yeah, they set up the meeting time and then.
So I did experience with the open, we referred it as open classes. And that's when parents had the opportunity to come to the school during the school day and observe how the class was being taught, to see like how their students are doing. And it was, I particularly had a couple parents come for my first and second graders, which is super young to start learning English, which in Korea it's the correct age is like third grade. Like
yes.
official grade to learn English is third grade. But they would come and ask questions about like during the open class, like as to what was happening. And I had to provide the lesson plan for them to have access to see exactly like everything that they're supposed to do during that class.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's very, very different setups. Even from my own experience, there was, and from my teaching experiences, my multilingual students, their parents were always engaged, would always come to anything that we asked them to come to, and it was great to sit down and have some really good conversations with them as well. But at school where I was principal before, we had 33,000 volunteer hours, and that was just above and beyond like other types of engagement that we had. So
Wow.
it's really just this, huge dynamic between maybe for sure twice a year, which some schools I think here potentially maybe really only meet twice a year, potentially for parent teacher conferences. Maybe you have a Title I night, maybe a Title III night, things of that nature. But definitely a lot of similarities and differences though between cultures, which to me is just fascinating. I love that. Now, Aya, you have some unique experiences to this. I'm sure. Do you mind sharing your experience?
Yes, and then also I wanted to add the unique system in Japan, the school system. As Hyekyong and Genevieve said, the Korean has the parents visiting, like school visiting day. That we do have parents will visit school to see what like student doing, how they live the school life. But we have also the opposite program says that homeroom teacher will visit the student's house to talk about with parents.
Okay.
And then, well, this is I think the aim to be like focusing to see what kind of lifestyle they have and the environment. But considering about the multicultural or multi-language speaking student, we don't really have. I will say because the ratio is super low because we have a one race in Japan. But I was thinking that if we have this program here, like system here, that would be more easier because the teacher can see the student like lifestyle, like everyday life at home environment, and then just to see like what kind of background they have, and then I thought that's interesting, but it's hard for the teachers to visit all the students' house.
I think it's really funny that you mentioned that because I was just having a conversation with a teacher, not just the other day, about that. How she'd been teaching for like 30 years or something, like crazy insane. And she was talking about how she used to make like those house visits. Like it was required at her school. So like they would do so many visits and just to go out and visit with the parents. So I think that's really interesting.
I know that I had a few times whenever I would go and get to hang out. Yeah, the apartment complex where some of the students would live, and a lot of them, they would find these communal areas and all and live together, right? And so it was really fun to get to go just play basketball sometimes with the kids and have a little cookout or something, but just to learn more about them, who they are, their culture, and all the assets that they bring as they enrich our classrooms. Well, thank you all for sharing that. And listeners, just so you know, we've been having a whole lot of conversation centered around multilingualism, multiculturalism, and what this looks like in the field of assessment and evaluation in bilingual English language development classrooms. And so I think it's great that we've already kind of jumped off a little bit, talking from a teacher side, parent sides, and how we get to know our students. We have our parents engaged, but all of that plays a role into the academic success of our students. And again, listeners, it's been really fantastic to work with these master's level graduate students as they are creating placement assessments, administering that assessment, making an evaluation from that, creating an English learner profile for students. Also been reviewing some issues that we have in the field of assessment and evaluation and how that impacts and affects the academic success of our language learners and our multicultural students. But then also creating a profile of what can happen next for these students. And so really digging deep into all of this, and also later on we'll be looking at other types of assessments and then doing a critique of that as well. So we've had a lot of conversations around assessment and evaluation and what that looks like and what that means. And I'm so excited because many of our listeners can apply what we discussed in many different arenas, maybe sometimes outside of the field of education. So a shout out to my mom, because I know that she's going to be listening to this podcast as well, but she always tries
Hi,
to
Mom.
take parts of it. Yes. Hey, Mom. But she really likes to take parts of the conversation and apply it to where she would work in the plasma
fantastic.
field, for example. And so she's made a whole lot of connections. So I'm really anxious to maybe even hear from some listeners about some connections that they've made in the school system and maybe even outside of the school system. But with that, I really want to start off with the question of considering our multilingual, multicultural students who have English language acquisition plans, and they have received this English language acquisition plan or some sort of a plan for language acquisition purposes based off of a formal assessment of language proficiency. Here in Oklahoma, we use the WIDA access test. Texas, for example, has TELPAS. Other states have their own assessments. But WIDA is, I believe, in around 43 of the states, 44, I believe, maybe of the states, 43, 44 of those states here in the nation. So my question I want to pose to you all is how, from your experiences, both personally and professionally, and even having a child in the U.S. education system right now in 5th grade, I mean, how can educators effectively integrate those formal assessments of language proficiency, like WIDA, for example, into teaching strategies to really help our students have higher outcomes overall? And what role do you think, if any, thinking about that English language acquisition plan and the use of their native language, how does that impact instruction in the classroom?
Well, I think it's really huge. I mean, you cannot effectively set goals as an educator for your students if you do not have something that guides you to at least get close to that. We've been talking about placement tests a lot, and WIDA is a really great starting point for a language proficiency assessment. So it just helps the educator, it helps them be able to just see where the student is across all the domains, the language domains: reading, writing, listening, speaking. And in addition to that, educators will be more knowledgeable on assessment, their assessment framework, so that they know how to set that up. If they know how to properly make assessments, if they know how to do all of that, and they have a good background frame, then they can set their student up for success. I think that's really important.
Not specifically about where you work, but just in general, from your overall teaching experiences, do you recognize that all teachers know what the English language acquisition plan is and what those language proficiency standards are, or do you find that it's mostly just the English language development teacher that knows that?
Yeah, I do think it's primarily the English language development teacher, and even the department head. I mean, we try to, as a group, get everyone on board, but No, a majority of my teachers, I think, at my school they're all still learning. We have a
Mhm.
lot of new teachers. A lot of the turnover, is sometimes very great, and that impacts so much as well. So, no, I can't say that we're not, that our instructional coaches aren't doing, what they're supposed to.
Mhm.
They absolutely are. It's just really hard as an educator. I think when you're coming in, you're new to everything, you're trying to get used to your own role. And then they're like, oh, by the way, we have 62% English language learners in our class.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely something that I think is a little bit of a shock. But all you can do, because I remember my first year, is just take bits and pieces of it and digest it like slowly.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's doing the best that they can. Absolutely.
Well, I think it's important for us to remember that no one is a native born speaker of academic
Absolutely.
language, right? And so whenever we're
Yes.
considering because it's always like we're going to focus on basically our content standards,
Yes.
and then we have this little bubble at the bottom of a page that might give us some insight into what we can do to help differentiate instruction for our language learner. Whenever really that bubble should be at the top. That should be the lens that we're already going through, because we're all acquiring language. And even to the idea of translanguaging, we even translanguage between Shakespearean English into modern English, and then you can get some Shakespearean raps or things like that right now. But
Right.
but you've been mixing and playing with language in such a way,
Yes.
and the more that we know about that process and what that looks like, especially for acquisition for our multilingual students, I think that it just really helps elevate the academic experience, the rigor, and the academic language that's utilized in our content areas, apart from just a language development program. Does anyone else? You can just popcorn out. Yeah.
So, kind of touching on what Julie was saying about how mostly it'll be the ELD teachers or above them that will know of those ELAP, as we were saying, plans and that content being available. Coming from a substitute teacher perspective,
yeah.
I've I've taught in elementary, middle school, and high school at all levels. And not once has any teacher ever left a note saying, in my class, I have an EL learner. Not once has it ever been made
interesting.
aware to me as a
That isn't.
substitute. Because I am in this program, I have been able to pick up on that just from observing like the students in the classes.
Oh, that's great.
But I think it would be good for those teachers to make a note for substitutes, so that way if they are helping, because on the elementary level in particular, where the substitutes are more involved with actually teaching, whereas more so in the high school they're a little bit more hands off. Having that awareness, so that way the substitute can take that into account when they're trying to teach the material, when they're trying to help the students if the students have questions. That being able to have that information, but I know would make leaps and bounds in what the substitute's able to do, because you'll even have substitutes who do long-term subpositions.
Right. Exactly.
Oh,
And
absolutely, yeah.
I know for a fact that still didn't have that information even as a long-term substitute. That information was still not given.
And see, and that impacts your understanding. Even if even a substitute may not be able to delve deep into this and may not understand all of it, but at the same time, just to be aware. And I think awareness
Oh, yes.
is definitely key, right? For linguistic purposes, but as well as the cultural perspective that plays a role in that.
Well, and for like how to use it effectively for like the education side, having the information will also give the teacher a little bit more confidence, like the substitute more confidence when helping the students, because they're like, I'm teaching them this, but why aren't they getting it? Why are they just staring at me? And then instead of writing a bad note, well, this student was not doing the work, this student was doing this instead. Oh, well, I now know
Now it makes sense.
it's because they need me to break this down even further to them, or having just the modifications that they might need in the class available just somewhere on the desk or in the lesson in the substitute plans would
Be huge.
would be huge.
Well, whenever we know better, we can do better.
Exactly. That
Exactly.
is so true.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I want to share my own experience that as a person who experienced like taking TOEFL
Yeah.
or studying for a TOEFL test. So back in Japan, I was taking the pre-TOEFL like class that basically the studying for the TOEFL test to get a high score. But actually, the result, specifically on the reading comprehensions,
Mhm.
that influenced my L1 reading comprehension as well. The taking the test strategy
Yeah.
is super like important to know that actually that I know how to take this test.
Mhm.
I know how it goes,
Mhm.
so it affects my like lower.
Your effective
Yes.
filter, yes, because you
So,
understand how it
yes.
looks and what the process is. Your
Uh-huh.
effective filter is therefore lowered, right?
Yes, and I
Mhm.
can actually have a confidence on the test, and during the test, say, okay, I don't have to worry about what's the next, like what is coming for the next. And then also that I have a lot of students visiting school here that shows that they can understand, they can read, they can speak, but they don't know how to take a test.
Mm.
So I think it's really important to not teach, but let them help that, like maybe practice few times before the test, or like give them like helpful strategy tools.
And you were practicing in Japanese
Yes.
for the
yes.
for the
TOEFL,
English, the
yeah,
TOEFL
hi.
test, right?
Mhm.
And so that's such a
Mhm.
genius and obvious idea, but
Yeah.
I haven't myself necessarily even thought about in that way. So I'm really glad that you're sharing that experience, because how I mean, how much easier would it be for our students to be able to go through and practice the assessment in the language that they already know and understand, to know how it works, to know how it sounds, to know the functions, the mechanics of that assessment. So whenever I go back into it, I don't have to worry about that anymore. All I have to worry about is showing off my bilingual superpower.
Yeah, exactly.
Just that. That's really great insight.
Well, and that sounds like using translanguaging.
It
right?
just sure
Yeah.
is.
Good job.
Yeah.
Bringing it all in together, making these connections. I love it.
I think the biggest problem with the UIDA or TOEFL is that they're like only serving their purposes as a gatekeeper, not like formative assessment. And I think as Julie mentioned, the system is already there, right? So like before Dr. Forbes mentioned the ELAB, I had no idea like this kind of document existed.
For your daughter, right?
Yeah, and of course for example my EL students, I got the ELAB for my student for my language assessment project, and just one look at the ELAB would reveal many facts. Like for example, her speaking level would be like 1.8, whereas her reading level is like almost 5.0.
Wow.
And like I was so like those utilizing those data and a little talk with her mom or herself would tell a lot of information about the student, because like she's already fully like literate in her native language, heritage language. So only like the best like optimal strategies, learning strategies, or like the teachers could use is that the students should learn how to like transfer that knowledge in L1 to English, right? So I think those informations on the ELAB should be utilized, not just leave it there and like just done with. And yeah, I think that's something that can be done here.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And like as a teacher, I know like we're all busy and our work is never done, right? And we could easily say like we don't have time for that. But yeah, I mean for the students, it's a lot better for them to utilize those strategies and utilizing those data. And like to stick to the question that Dr. Forbes asked, like there are a few things that I came up with. So like in the ELAB, it says like what kind of heritage language the teacher has. So for example, I know there's a 4th grader Korean newcomer in my daughter's school. So maybe the homeroom teacher, like learning from this data, they can match those two students to to exchange a heritage language. So I mean the optimal thing would be like heritage language instruction, but like practically it's not feasible. So in the near future, in like a place like Edmond, so like Korean. So I think like pairing up those language exchange partnerships and also like holding some kind of like cultural events to validate the heritage, culture, and language.
1,000%.
So
yes.
adding the additive bilingualism would be something that we could, pull up, right? So
Two parts to this I think are really interesting. One, how you had mentioned that you have experienced a lot of opportunities for engagement in the school system where your daughter does go to school. But yet at the same time, through all those experiences, although you probably did receive a parent notification letter that said that your child has scores in listening, speaking, reading and writing, etc., and it's a 1 point this and a 4 point that, or whatever it is, right? But the fact that all of that engagement and involvement didn't necessarily translate into you even understanding that she had an English language acquisition plan, I think one is telling, because we know that our parents are the first teachers of our students.
Absolutely.
And so whenever we're able to have that communication, that conversation, just think about all of the amazing things that we can come up with together. Again, ironing, sharpening iron, and we can create experiences at home and in the classroom that elevate content and language at the same time while doing what you just said, which is everything that I'm all about, is uplifting those cultures that are represented, not just globally, but most specifically in our schools and in our districts, making that a huge celebration.
It's so funny that you mentioned that too, because that happened at my school. I'll never forget the first year that I had parent-teacher conferences and I was sharing all that information with them. Once I learned how to do that, it was so great. But no, also this year alone, like we took those scores and we showed the students, like a lot of these students had been taking this test since they were pre-K. And they never had seen like all of it all together across all the different domains. And I think it really encouraged them this year to do really well on the WIDA test. Because every year it's just, it's that test I have to take again in the spring.
And no one really knows why.
They don't know why.
Especially the student, yeah.
Yes. And so for them to see where they're at I think has made huge leaps and bounds for them.
I think it's a great opportunity for us to let students know that, hey, here is your English language acquisition plan. This is what it is. It is what it looks like.
It lets
Here
them
are
in
the
charge
expectations
of their learning.
But and it is, rather unfortunate that you're going to have to take another assessment than some of your friends are going to have to take. But at the same time, though, what it can do is it can show off, again, your superpower. And it's one step closer to the syllabi literacy for some of our students, which therefore impacts scholarships, impacts career opportunities, and many other things that might be really fantastic for their future.
And we will be right back. Are you ready to take your K through 12 multilingual programs to new heights? Look no further than the experts at Kelly B's Consulting. We're not just consultants, we're partners in education, with a passion for empowering students and enriching your classrooms. At Kelly B's Consulting, we understand the unique cultural and linguistic needs of your diverse student population. Our team of experienced educators will work alongside you, tailoring strategies that transform your multilingual programs. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Visit www.kellybsconsultingllc.com today to learn more and schedule your consultation. Kelly B's Consulting, shaping the future of K through 12 multilingual education across the nation. Your success is our commitment. Contact us now and let's start building a brighter tomorrow together. And now, back to the show.
I want to go back though a little bit to the newcomer student who is from Korea as well, and the idea of intentionally bringing these students together, not only for the purpose of being able to have someone that has experience here versus the newcomer, and they can speak and talk to each other and probably lower the affective filter again and calm our nerves a lot, because there is a lot of culture shock that can happen. Most definitely, we've discussed that on previous episodes before, but I want to touch a little bit on the idea of translanguaging, and I know that hasn't necessarily been a deep conversation necessarily yet in what we've been discussing, but we have discussed it. We have brought up the concept of translanguaging, discussed what that looks like, what that can look like in the classroom, and read a little bit of research about that. But how do you think that the role of translanguaging might support those two students from Korea specifically, whenever you have someone who has, again, experience in the education system, who can communicate now with a student who's a brand newcomer, and having that shared within a content area in class?
So I can actually comment on that
Yeah.
because I actually
Anybody, hop in.
substituted for this student. So the student she's referring to,
Oh, so this is where-
I told her about this student.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
had the inside information. That's how you do.
So she knows about this student because I actually substituted for them. And I will say this was the first time I had a teacher leave a note that there was an EL in the class. The note all it did say though was that you're probably going to have to use a translator app to be able to communicate with the student because the student doesn't know any English. But they did have another student in the class that also spoke Korean, that spoke English. And because I did learn some Korean while I was teaching there, I was able to go and talk to her in her native language. And I saw her eyes get so big. And she was just like, when they were doing like their math, it was for math. It was a math assignment. She was actually like flagging me over to ask for help, and I was able to help her with my limited Korean, but I was still able to help her with that. And the other student that was in the class that typically helps her, he had noticed that he hadn't had to go over there to explain anything to her or walk her through it, and he looked at me and I asked him, I was like, because it was in the plan, if he was okay, and he was like, yeah, but I help her because she doesn't know English. And I was like, well, I know Korean. And he goes, wait, really? And so
what are the chances of that?
Yeah, he was very shocked by it. And but he was telling me, he's like, yeah, it's hard because I have to help her with hers before I can do mine. But I did notice that he didn't have, because this is one thing we've kind of learned, is maybe if you have a student who is helping that student, to give them less work. Sometimes, so that way, because they're having to do two jobs of learning it themselves and then also teaching that to their classmate, but he had the same amount as everybody else. And so he was like, I was able to actually get through all of my own work because I wasn't having to help her. But he said that every day he has to help her in every class.
Yeah, I think so often sometimes that ends up being a little bit of the fallacy, unfortunately, of what ends up happening is that you had a note, which I think it's important for the substitute or anyone to be able to know a little asterisk or something that explains, hey, just so you know, this child is also a language learner, and here are some things that need to be implemented in order for them to be the most successful possible. But that, therefore, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have the other student have to end up taking on adult responsibilities sometimes. Because I think that there's that balance there, right? Between let's collaborate and be able to work together, have grade level content still, because just because this child's level of Korean is not the same as their level of English proficiency doesn't mean that content wise we're not on grade level. And so we can't always just rely on a translation app, for example, or another student, just translating, because then we're kind of missing in that beauty. It's again, it's such a superpower, but such a superpower that we just use it so like loosely and easily, and just say, hey, student X, can you go ahead and use your superpower that I don't really recognize as a superpower, so you can go ahead and do my job and your job. And that maybe not really being the intention, but whenever you step back and look at it, it's kind of exactly what that process was, as opposed to creating a space for translanguaging to happen where they can be working on grade level content together, looking up information in any language, having those conversations, going through that cognitive process of understanding the content, and then finding scaffolded ways to produce comprehensible output in the target language or in both languages, perhaps. So that way everyone is being enriched by hearing the other language, but also acquiring another language as well. It's exciting for me. I heard someone say in a training not too long ago, most specifically in a multilingual classroom that's not maybe just Korean speakers or just Spanish speakers, but whenever you have Japanese, Korean, English, Spanish, German, French, for example, Mandarin, all in one classroom. For example, when I had the 7 countries and 8 languages, how do you create that ecosystem in your classroom where people feel valued and celebrated, and they get to use all of their language assets, all of their linguistic repertoire, as they're acquiring an additional language at the same time?
That would be really challenging.
It is, yeah, it is. But that's where you start to get really creative as a
I
teacher.
totally agree.
Yeah.
Because like 10 different languages could mean like 10 different lenses, 10
Mhm.
different perspectives.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and language builds on each other, right? So the more that I hear about other languages,
Sure.
it only enhances mine at the same time.
Well, I also substituted at the high school level, and they did have that kind of ecosystem within the classes. There were students who spoke from Afghanistan, from China, from Mexico, from Colombia, from Poland, from where else?
Wow.
There was another one. I can't remember, but like India, like all like this. I mean, that's multiple different languages, multiple backgrounds, and they would all be in the one class together learning English. And it was one thing I will say that was kind of fun was sitting back and watching them interact with each other because while they all had like English is kind of like that commonality between them, I would see some of the Spanish speakers speaking with the Chinese speakers, but they were speaking in their native languages, and then they would have a translator out between them, but they were just conversing normally,
Interesting.
and they would help each other with the assignment that was in English,
Yeah.
but doing it in their native languages. And it was
They're making some meta-linguistic awareness, right? They're making some
Yes,
connections
they
for
were.
sure.
And
Yeah.
I will say that was one of my most fun classes to have substituted for, just because I could hear multiple different languages being spoken at the same time as they were just because like one kid called his mom and he was speaking in Polish on the phone at the same time that was happening with those girls like talking to each other, and then there were two brothers who were speaking to each other, and so hearing it all happen while they're all still working on their English assignment.
That is so
I mean,
incredible.
I love that.
I mean, they're really making cross-linguistic connections
were,
right there
yeah.
in the moment and still acquiring the content that was needed.
Yeah.
And I just want to like reinforce it again, like no one is getting behind whenever multiple languages get to be used. It's actually the quite opposite. You acquire more of your additional language and you have a deeper understanding of the content that you're learning.
Well, and I noticed like the girls who spoke of different languages they were teaching each other also their own language. They would teach each other
That
like
is so cute.
certain words and phrases, so then that way they could talk to each other still in their native as well, besides English.
I would have some people that would tell me sometimes because again in the classroom they would learn everyone else's language and they say, but no, they're not learning English. I'm like, no, they're actually learning all the languages and English. And so
I think that's really important for relationship building too. Like even in my own classroom, I use French sometimes as like I'll ask them in Spanish how to say something in Spanish, but I'm like, oh, interesting, because it's similar in French, and they're very interested and intrigued by that. So I think that is really cool.
As they said, that it's important to like make the environment that student know that it is okay not knowing English, or it is okay to be like multilingual. Like it's, as you said, the quite opposite is so cool to have like
Absolutely.
knowledge or like skills that they know another language, like except English or multi language.
Yeah.
I have a school, and I've been to the school. Says there was the multiple Asian students, and then came here and then learning English. But I was doing the Japanese presentation to promote Japanese culture for the middle school. That was the middle school, so like first grade. And then so after the presentation, one girl came up to me and says, "Hey, how about like, what do you eat when you do this in your country? Because my country does this." So she started sharing her own culture. And then the classroom teacher saw it and then came up to me like, "What was she saying?" Because I never heard, like she said that she's super quiet. She never like opened her mind to share any kind of
that's
like
so
her
cool.
personal stuff. But I said, I think she's from Korea. And then like she was sharing the food and then like stuff. But she said, "Oh, I didn't know that." Oh, so the classroom teacher didn't know where she's from, what kind of like background culture she has. So I think it's also like important that for the teacher to have more interest and then try to understand or like to be beside to the student, yes. So that way they know or they feel more comfortable to open to their mind about the culture.
I totally agree that validating one's culture and the language is really important. like even as a graduate student, like sometimes in our classroom, such certain terms like standard deviation, like the Korean translation sticks to me like more easily like than the English translation. So like just to be able to communicate in your language like makes them feel like more confident and sometimes it's efficient. So
I think that is one of the most important things that we can do is truly take real, specific, and intentional moments to recognize the cultures that are represented and to celebrate them. And it's that saying, even if I don't speak your language, I can still sit at your table and share your food. I can still learn your stories. And the more that I learn about that, the more it influences me as an educator to be a better educator. Because in education, from my point of view, is it's a form of servant leadership. We're here to serve others. We know what we have to do according to accreditation or rules or policies or whatever directives that we have from our superintendents or whatever initiatives we have overall. But we also know those that we're serving, right? And so the more that we can understand and listen to understand, not listening just to answer or listening to say, your way of parental engagement was wrong, and so this is how you're supposed to do it, but really building upon all of the funds of knowledge and all the assets that we bring, I think can't help but change our pedagogical practices and the way that we evaluate the programs that we're in to make them better. Because whenever you go back and you start looking at data, we can see where some students overall in the multilingual field of education do make gains of success. But if you look nationwide, it typically there's different demographics, different subcategories, for example, but it's a lot of times you'll see your multilingual students not always represented in your advanced placement classes or not always represented in your honors classes or maybe not participating in whatever program at the same level that you would or even their academic performance. And I think a lot of that has to go back to what we've been discussing. If teachers don't know the English language acquisition plan, if they don't understand the role that culture plays in what we do in our work and our assessments, whether it be formative or summative, and if we don't understand the cultural components of this, then that could also create, even bias in what we do. There's conscious bias and there's unconscious bias sometimes. And we've been having some conversations about this as well, about cultural bias in assessments. And even just driving over here, I saw where there's a Catholic church nearby and it said mass schedule. And when it said mass schedule, even just in that moment, I was considering different ways that you could think and interpret that had you not known it was specific to a Catholic church, right? And so mass could mean multiple different things, but since you were coming from the background of Catholicism, you knew that mass was their service and the schedule was the schedule of the services that they have, which is mass, right? But that could have been, interpreted in a different way from different backgrounds. So with that in mind, how all have you experienced professionally or personally cultural bias potentially in assessment, and how has that impacted you and or your students?
this isn't necessarily like a bias per se, but one day like my daughter came up to me and said like, how was I supposed to know like how many inches are there in our feet? And because it's South Korea, I shared this story with you guys already. So like Korea uses like metric system, whereas United States you guys use
almost everywhere.
imperial system. Like she had no idea like how long an inch is, or let alone like how those like how different
like what even is
measuring
that is such a good example.
Translates. So like she said like even though I knew all the rules how to solve the math problem, she couldn't because like, and she was like kind of, this was like early in like late August or something, so when like right like 1 month after we moved, and she wasn't like sure like whether she could ask questions during the test at all, because like in Korea it's not like, it's kind of like a taboo too. So like she said like she shared the story, and like I realized like this kind of like gave me a new lens to look through my assessment as well. So like looking through these newly acquired lenses made me like realize like even though like really highly standardized tests could be really built upon a lot of assumptions. So this was a eye-opening experience for me.
I have experience taking a test and not taking a homework, doing a homework and grammar assignment. Say that so the response question in English, the negative form. So like, didn't you go back to Japan this summer? If it's no, that means you went back to Japan, right? But Japanese, it's how you responded in Japanese was opposite.
Okay.
So if it's no
It's
to the sentence, yes, we say.
I feel like you see that a lot in tests, don't you? Like where they try to trick you a little bit. Yeah, they try to trick you. Like, it's like, yeah.
The Japanese grammar are totally different, so it can be confused. Like I was
Very
having a
confusing.
hard time to say, is it yes? I didn't, but it has to be.
Oh
yes.
my gosh, this is right here. This is what's so interesting and gets me so excited because, like,
It's hard to explain.
well, no, but I mean, it makes so much sense just because of just like grammatically how Japanese is versus in English. I mean, like, for example, my salsa partner, Marti, I always laugh because if I ask her a question, she's from Colombia, and anyhow, you ask the question, she goes, no, see. And it's like, no, yes.
Yes.
But anyhow, but she's like, no, but we be like, no, but yes. Like, but it's like, no, but yes, but it's no.
It really, like,
You're like, which is it?
it happens all the time to me too, because like in the Korean language, it's similar to Japanese in that way. It's
Yes.
like a couple of days ago, I went to Trader Joe's
Uh-huh.
and I bought this canvas bag, and the clerk asked me like, "Don't you want this bag like to be used?" And I froze because I need to like translate it in Korean and then like respond like
You're like, do I?
different way than I do in Korean. So like, but I like made a mistake and I said yes, and then she kind of like, so I like the total confusion occurred because of that difference. So yeah,
Also,
it
like
happens
a
all the time.
culture, like each culture also have like characteristics. But I believe that language also has own characteristics.
Mm.
So the Japanese, I think here all of you know that Japanese verb comes at the end of the sentence.
Mhm.
So the most important parts comes last. So the Japanese personality, when I talk or like when I write,
Yeah.
especially the essay, the Japanese essay, we tended to explain the process
Mm.
or reason, like or
Backgrounds.
first, and then the result comes last. So you have to wait until the last to the main point. But when I was practicing the essay or
Yeah.
essay questions, it's opposite. We have to
Right.
kind of main point first and then break it down. So it's something that you need to like a skills or
And that would impact the
Assessment.
outcome of a student on their
Mhm, of
assessment.
course.
And so if they're
Mhm.
writing an essay, for example, which I know, Julie, you specifically had done your paper about multiple choice versus essay questions, like, and that's an interesting topic to consider as an issue in assessment.
Mhm.
What does that look like for the essay portion in my understanding if I'm the one grading it with a rubric or
Yes.
something?
Mhm.
What does that look
Yes.
like? Because if it is a placement assessment, maybe I'll misplace them. If
Wow.
it is
Mhm.
just the standardized test, maybe as a gatekeeping assessment, for example, then maybe it doesn't allow them to exit out of a program because I wasn't aware of that in the language and I couldn't express that and we couldn't have that conversation to let them know what the setup of the assessment was supposed to be. What was that essay supposed to look like? And I think that you had maybe mentioned that in South Korea before that even math is different, right? Like fractions or
Oh yeah.
and considering how it's the whole, even the
Right.
address starts with the country and goes down.
Right.
Do you mind sharing that's
So
the
to
story?
add on Aya's perspective, I think it's really cultural thing. Like culture is such like air you breathe in. You don't
Mhm.
realize like it's so natural, right? It's almost feel like a skin to yourself. But like for someone who's from out of that culture, it could be really foreign.
Yeah.
Feels weird.
Yeah. So what was the question again? Sorry. I was like, so immersed in
Japanese
culture.
too.
Well, just
Addresses.
considering like that cultural bias, like if I were teaching math, but I didn't recognize
Oh,
that
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
is what
The
everyone
address.
starts with,
just
right?
so the Korean culture and as well as like most of Asian culture, I think we are focused on like the holistic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the even reading the way we read address comes from like the we zoom in from the bigger things to smaller things. So my adolescent in Korea would read South Korea, Seoul, like something something,
Oh,
so
yeah.
district,
Going
and then the
small.
apartment
Yeah.
suite. But it's the opposite, exactly opposite here, right? So you zoom out from the starting from the smaller units. So even reading the fractions would be like here it's 1/3, right? So you focus on one out of like the whole,
Yeah.
3 parts. But we here for Koreans, it's like exactly the opposite. So like in Korean, it's 3분의 1, like 3, like there's 3 parts, and then you take one. You really like that. So for my daughter, it's crazy. So she gets like confused every time. So it takes her time. Yeah, she figured out like eventually, but she was like complaining. Like, why is it so different and difficult in English? So
Now, do her teachers know that?
I don't think so. Like I mean, like as much as she like her homeroom teacher is kind and everything, like I'm not sure like whether
She
she
might not.
shares. Maybe she
We don't
does.
realize.
Yeah.
Well,
You
I
just
would-
don't recognize it, right? And it impacts the results,
Yeah, they're
which therefore
like
impacts
trying
our
something
evaluation of the programs, et cetera. So it's just really important to consider what does that bias look like.
Well, I was going to say it wasn't even until I took this class that I
Oh.
had even considered like test bias. Like that was like
Yeah.
like when you read off one of those test questions, and I was like, how is that bias? And then I was like, oh.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important just for educators to be aware.
Yeah,
Just to be aware that they
Yeah.
exist. I
Just
mean,
to be
you
aware.
can't be 100% when
Right.
you're creating assessments, but you can be aware, and you can just take that moment to stop and ask yourself, how can this be answered? How many different ways this can be answered?
Yeah.
What different lens could you look through to answer this? So
Well, and for that, kind of going back to what I said earlier about how teachers might not, what we were saying earlier about teachers not having access, or not having access, but not being aware of those ELAPs to have access and know what they can do. For me, when I was substituting, there was a student who his native language, and I can't remember exactly which his native language was, but like the alphabet was completely different, right? And he was having to take a quiz, but there was no note for for me as a substitute that he might need more time, or you might need to walk him through the questions just to be able to do this. So those teachers, even though they're not leaving for the sub, they might not be aware. So they're just giving him this quiz or this test with the assumption of he's going to do it the same time as everybody else. And so then he's obviously going to fail it because he's not getting that extra help. And so the bias of is, well, he's in my class. He can do it just like the others are. He's just not getting the content. And then they fail him.
Yeah.
And knowing, okay, well, his native language doesn't even have the same alphabet. So he's even having to read it one letter at a time and not even able to write simple words. Like he asked for help on how to spell cat, and this was a 4th grader.
Yeah.
And he was having to write a sentence about prepositions. And it's like he can't even spell the word cat without help one letter at a time. How is he supposed to be able to answer a quiz question about a preposition?
And so again, important to consider, what are we assessing? What's our goal? What are we trying to learn? And making sure that, because of course we none of us know everything. We're all human, trying to do our best to learn more. But I think that we can at least have the good intention and actually apply ourselves to reflect upon, again, the students whom we're serving in our classrooms, their cultures, their languages, because language and culture really can't be separated, but they have their own unique characteristics, right? Like you were saying. But then just for me to, at least as I'm going through and grading my formative or summative assessment, being able to stop and reflect, is this still meeting the standard of what I was assessing, even though it's not necessarily the answer I thought I was going to get? Because maybe there was a little bias in there, based on background, based on culture, based on language syntax, the forms, things of that nature, that just had us answer differently from what the teacher or the administrator had even considered being an option as an answer. I think that's really, really interesting, and something good for all of us out there in education to consider as we are providing accommodations and supports for our students in preparation throughout the year. for their end of the year assessments, content area, or language proficiency, right?
Absolutely.
Well, as we wrap up here, I just want to ask one last question about you all reflecting on your own journey in multilingual and multicultural education. And here in this interconnected global society, I think that we ourselves are able to learn so much more about different languages and cultures than we have been able to before. And I think it's taking that time and that opportunity to really jump in and make that happen. But in reflecting upon your own experiences, again, either personally or professionally, what stands out as your most significant realization since you began your master's program?
Oh my gosh. For me, it was probably
not just the certain course thing, but I mean, it can be, but overall in the program.
No, absolutely. For me, it was definitely my sheltered instruction training, just that they throw us into for being a new teacher, an ELD teacher especially. But it really, oh my gosh, it really just gave me a deeper understanding and respect and appreciation for my students. I mean, talk about an aha moment, one after the other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that for me was really incredible, and it just changed my perspective on everything. So, and how I approach teaching and how I approach and interact with my students. So, it actually so rememberable for me. Fantastic. Anyone else?
I believe the language, like learning or studying, acquiring the language will last like forever. Like studying math, maybe during the school year or like until you graduate. Some people they don't deal with later on after that.
Right.
But the language will be like always be with your life. So something that has to be last longer. I think it's important for teacher to like attract the students to have more interest. I think I really love the word called interest because if you don't like it, you can't like keep doing or study or improve.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the teacher can play the role to have not kids but the students like help
to make things compelling, exciting,
be a bridge to the language and like students.
Well, I think that's really interesting because that's exactly, you don't learn from people that you don't like, right?
Yes.
If you're interested in your
That's
teachers
true.
or if they take interest in you, like you're definitely going to obtain that information. So,
Yeah, for me, it's or at least for my personal experience, would be more so when I was in Korea. Whereas it was a little bit different from teaching English as second language here in helping those multilingual learners. But they're learning English as a foreign language, so it's slightly different experience. But seeing their progress was so motivating for me, and seeing my students when I would walk in the door at the beginning of the school day, and my little kindergartners and first and second graders would come up to me and say something to me in English that they had learned, and them wanting to take like the time, like every time they'd see me, they would point to something, like point something out that they had learned and say it in English, and it was just like it made me smile every time because they were going out of their way to try and speak in my language, and so I would do the same for them. I would try and speak to them in Korean, but seeing just the progress of all of my students, because I did kindergarten through sixth grade, and seeing them progress over the years and from when they started to when I left, just having the opportunity to impact their English, and some to go on and say that they want to keep learning it because they had so much fun in the classes, and that, just, yeah. So overall, just it was really meaningful to me, and it's actually part of the reason why I decided to continue that here in the ELD field, was because of my experience there, helping them learn English, and so continuing it here.
But obviously how much they've impacted you
Yeah.
at the same time. Yeah, that's incredibly special.
And this has happened to me when I was in Korea too. I was working in a kind of like an experimental school where teachers get to experiment whatever they wanted to, like all the sources, like all the money was there. So like I collaborated with one of the music teacher, and we did this like collaborative assessment where music and English can be assessed. And this was kind of like a group project where students get to choose like one pop song, and then they could even like change the lyrics. And there was this because I randomly, I mean purposely grouped together like certain students. There was this troublemaker, and like everybody like didn't like him. It was kind of like there was a certain point where he gets like violent, and even some teachers, including myself, maybe was afraid of him. But like I remember like what got into him, like, or what kind of like other members of that group like persuaded him. But like I like still like to this day, like I still like vividly remember where like the whole group like sang together like this song by Jason Mraz, "Count on Me." And one of the two students brought even the guitar to play along. And like I was like there were like certain like other teachers who attended because it was kind of like a little concert. And like I remember like how shocked like everybody was, because like the look, like the blushing face of him, like yeah, I've always heard that everybody's struggling his own battle, like you have no idea about it. We should give students like a benefit of the doubt, like for certain behaviors. But like we can be really, teachers can be teachers' job can be very draining and sometimes stressful. So like I was at the point, but like seeing them like really realize like the purpose of my job as a teacher to serve my students. And also like during the presentation, Dr. Forbes asked me, like I was doing this presentation about like the comparison between Korean SAT and American SAT. And at the end of the presentation, Dr. Forbes asked what kind of service I could do when I go back to Korea to Korean learners. And it was like really, I was really like taken aback, because that's something that I've never like thought about. And yeah, that was really an eye-opening experience for me since I started this master's program. Something that I've been really grateful and happy about.
Well, I'm so honored and just thankful I get to be with you all in this space, and I mean that with all my heart, because you all have helped me learn more than what I expected to learn from this. But I wouldn't have been able to had it not been for your vulnerability and being open and talking about this, and then even coming here today to share this. And it's so much better for so many people listening. Before we close out, are there any final words that anyone would like to share, or just anything for the listeners out there, whether they're in education or not, whether it be about school or not, but just about maybe culture and the connections that we have in our everyday life? Is there anything that you all would like to share in your final words?
I just believe that always 1 second that you can inspire or change someone's life. So as educators, that there are a lot of moments like to deal with students who has a lot of potential in the future. So I think we should be aware and then super have confidence that I can change their life.
Yes.
So yeah. So I'm also passionate about like sharing cultures, especially Japanese culture. So, but I want to keep doing this, and then wants to meet people that I want to change someone's life, but I also want to meet someone always to change my life.
Always, yeah, that's what we're doing, changing lives
appreciate
every
that.
day and having our lives changed as well.
I definitely agree with that. That's the main reason I became a teacher, is because of that, just that feeling that you get from making such a huge impact in someone's life. And I remember my own educational upbringing and all my
Yes.
teachers that inspired me in my life. And yeah, it's definitely huge. So just I guess for our listeners, just a takeaway is just to be mindful of your students, their culture, embrace their abilities to speak another language,
Lean
and
into
just help
it.
them on this journey. I mean, it's huge, but it's so rewarding.
Well, as an introvert, sometimes it really takes me courage to open up and speak up to like strangers or like even some friends. But I think when you open up, there's a lot more to learn. And I just want to stay as a student for the rest of my life. encouraging people and like get encouraged by other people. So
Yeah, we should all,
why not give it a try.
look at ourselves as a student.
Right.
I mean, we're constantly learning, constantly growing. I know I am.
Mhm.
And it's huge. Every time I think I know it all, I'm like, I know nothing at all.
I mean, even for the non-educators, those who are maybe more from the monolingual cultural side, just being more open-minded
Mhm.
because there are so many people from
Yes.
different cultures
Mhm.
out there, and just taking just that 1 second to maybe have that simple conversation, even if it's just a hello, how are you, even if it's in broken English from one side or from your side, well, it makes an impact on that person because that person might say, oh, you took the second to listen to me, you took that second to hear me, and it can change their experience as well because you never know what they're going through, what they've gone through. And so it works
Everyone's can
educational.
change the world.
Yeah, I think we're all on our culturally proficient journeys, learning more about ourselves and people around us. And I think that the more open minded that we are, the more that we sit down and listen to other people and have shared experiences. I think that we can really be better in who we are as individuals, but also collectively, and remembering that all of us are in this together. You listeners out there and this amazing panel right here, I just have to say again, thank you so much for being here and for opening up and for sharing all of your experiences and your expertise. There could not be a better panel than 4 amazing educational professionals, graduate students who are doing great things in this world. And I just appreciate you so much. Also want to do a big shout out to our producer, Mike Overholt. Thank you so much for being with us today. And to Dr. Taylor Tribble and EduSkills, EduSkills being the sponsor of our podcast today. And so I'm thankful that we were able to even, for the projects that we're doing and things that we're discussing, and even for your daughter, and consider the English language acquisition plans produced through EduSkills to help you and your daughter and her teacher, all of the teachers, work more collaboratively together for language and for content acquisition purposes. So it's been so fun to be with you all today. Thank you so much to all the listeners out there. Again, muchas gracias por todo. Thank you so much for everything. And we're about to sign out. And so I hope you have a great rest of your day, and adios.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Adios.